is a Mexican Indian. If the mother of the Lord is a Mexican Indian, then surely her son is too. If she speaks Nahuatl, then he does too. The message that Mary gives to Juan Diego is one of love, comfort, peace, or protection. I am your mother and the mother of all who live here. This is rather different from the message of hell and damnation which is awaiting those who do not turn from tradition and adopt the way of Christ. The old religion was one of terror too. Thousands of people died under the obsidian knife in Aztec human sacrifices. Yes, the demoralized, frightened, distressed people who are hearing a new note. Perhaps they're hearing the gospel for the first time. Come unto me, all who labour and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. The other thing is the hill of Tepeyac. It's a site that of the traditional divinities. But it's a Christian church that's now built there, changing its character. It was always sacred, now it's sacred to the God in whom we live and move and have our being. And indigenous people are responding to it as they never did as a traditional site, and never had yet to a Christian one. This is the story of the Black Virgin of Guadalupe. And I leave you to make what you can. La Morenita, the Black Virgin. It's a word I've never been able to say in either Spanish or English, but the meaning is the evangel. No, I can't say it in English either. It's the female evangelizer of the Americas, which has become her meaning. The year 1531. And it's the first sign, I think, in this rather unpleasant story that we've been in the last hour. The first sign that the Christian initiative was not entirely in the hands of Europeans, and not in the hands of European Christendom. The Word of God was coming in Nahuatl to illiterate peasants, and most unwillingly being received by the official church, which was being forced to recognize it. It was to take another 500 years for the implications to sink in. But here in German is part of the permanent significance of Christianity in Latin America. The last crusade then produced the first evangelization of Latin America. The first evangelization, we've said, was pre-mission. But the contact with the non-Western world did produce, as we were saying just now, this other mode of action that was different from that of the Crusaders. We don't have time to go to the other side of the Pope's line and see its origins. But we've already pointed to what happened. Only in small enclaves like Goa and Macau was it possible to use the Latin American model. Those who were serious about bringing Christ to Africa or Asia had to find another way, another order of messengers, people who would seek to persuade, to demonstrate, to offer, but couldn't coerce, who, on entering a society, had to learn its language, find a role, would live on that society's terms. It meant tapping into a tradition that had been there by a few Western Christians in relation to the Muslim world. We thought this morning of Ramon Lowell and of Francis, that brought people to a deep identification with the life, particularly of Asian countries. They had many successors, first Catholic, then Protestant, then both. And from there it went back to Latin America. So there's our chapter of Christian history that began about 1500, that saw the birth both of the end of the crusading movement, the beginning of the missionary. In the mercy of God, the King of Portugal never had enough servants to go out into the highways and byways and compel them to come in. Let's leave it there. Thank you for this time over these 3 days when we've been considering some of the cultural frontiers which the gospel crosses. We haven't, of course, tried to cross the African frontiers, because I knew it would take too long if we once started. But perhaps, if you let me come back, we can do some of that on another time. But we move into a different dimension of our foundations and conceptual foundations tomorrow. But I'll leave Professor Schultz to explain about that.
I wanted to get your opinion on what you consider the greatest impact, the Christian movement. Is it how will you assess the impact of the crusading movement, the expansion of Christianity in comparison to the missionary movement that came after it? will you say the Crusading movement had a positive impact, or it has some negative impact that slowed the expansion of Christianity into the nations today?
It looks, at first sight, it looks a success. That's why I think it's worth looking through the 4 passages today. Columbus, intention. Las Casas, implementation. Poma, what actually happens on the ground, where you find this is not the Christendom. This is not Europe, this is something different. But, and that takes us into the Black Virgin story, Latin American Christianity does come into being. If we had time to look at further, what I think I would say is that Latin America does not go through the 16th century until the 20th. And that what is happening now in Latin America was a very, if we had time again to look at Latin America as a theological, dynamic theological unit, yes, very important, but other Christian forces catching up. In fact, Latin America is different from the rest of the Christian world. It is a European artifact. So it's always going to be different, but it does not reproduce Europe. It goes its own way, and I think more and more, it becomes more and more desirable that Latin American Christians and African Christians take note of each other and interact with each other, particularly theologians, as the importance of indigenous peoples in Latin America becomes more and more recognized. This has been a development of the last 50 years. The indigenous people who are not following the Spanish, that is the European pattern, which has been dominant. The Asian and African story, well, we know roughly what has happened there. And that is very much the missionary story. The missionary movement, with all its faults, has been the appointed means. The missionary movement goes to Latin America too, as a sort of second generation. But what we've been looking at over these 3 days are cultural frontiers, as we've moved from Jewish into a Hellenistic, from a Hellenistic into a barbarian, from these are all dynamic stories as we cross the frontiers.
Thank you once again. It is customary. Please have a seat.